I'd like to call to order the January 14th, 2026 meeting of the Open Space Board of Trustees. We'll start by calling roll. To my right.
John Carroll, present.
And do we have folks online?
Yes, can you hear us?
Hi, Sarah. Hi,
Hi.
Michelle. Okay, so Trustee Glenn,
Present.
Trustee Estrella,
Here.
and I'm Harmon Zuckerman. I'm here, so we have a quorum of 4. I guess the first order of business is to amend the agenda. Now, we don't have a quorum of people who were here for the last meeting to approve the minutes for the last meeting, so we're going to move that. We're going to table that item until the February meeting. Now I'll turn it over to staff to read the rules of decorum.
Yes, sorry about that. Just grabbing those, and I will share my screen in just a moment. Okay. Sorry, just taking a moment to get the screen share. Yep, there we go. Okay. And it's just coming up here on the screen. There it goes. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and OSBT, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement processes, please visit this link. The city will enforce the rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code, including participants are required to sign up to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. No attendee shall disrupt, disturb, or otherwise impede the orderly conduct of any sitting meeting in a manner that obstructs the business of the meeting. This also includes failing to obey any lawful order of the presiding officer to leave the meeting room or refrain from addressing the board. Only one person at a time at the podium unless an accommodation like an interpreter is required. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No standing in or otherwise blocking the aisles in violation of the fire code or in any way that obstructs the vision or audio of other audience members. No signs or flags shall be permitted in council chambers except for one sign held by a person measuring no more than 11 by 17 inches, which is held no higher than the person's face. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. We ask that you not affix items to the podium or dais or walls or other surfaces of the chamber. Signs, flags, or other items used to communicate must be held by one person when displayed. Obscenity, other epithets based on race, gender, or religion, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the meeting will not be tolerated. In-person participants are asked to refrain from expressing support or disagreement verbally or with sounds such as applause or snapping, with the exception of declarations. Traditionally, support is shown through American Sign Language or applause or jazz hands. If you are joining in person and would like to speak during public comment or items identified for public hearing, please sign up at the table and we'll call you up to speak at the podium. If you're joining online, you can raise your hand using the little icon at the bottom. You may also, if you're joining by phone, click *9, and that'll raise your hand for you. And I'll go over that as we get to online participation as well. Okay.
Sam, I just wanted to prove to you that I'm listening to you. It apparently references in the rules of decorum that signs can only be held by people who measure 11 by 17 inches.
That was a good catch.
That yeah. Would be an interesting kind of person.
That is,
maybe an
yeah.
infant.
That was a good catch.
So that maybe signs measuring 11 by 17
yes.
inches held by a person would be better.
Yes. Yeah. That's
okay.
a good catch.
Thanks. All right. So thanks for doing that. And now we're we're passing by approval of the minutes, and we're going straight to public comment for items not identified in the public hearing. And tonight we have 2 requests for approval and recommendation of a conveyance of property, OSMP property through disposal, and those are our public hearing items. So if you want to speak to that, you'll have to wait until after those matters, or each matter, I should say. But if you have something you want to bring up unrelated to those public hearing items, now would be the time to speak.
Great. Thank you. And we have 3 speakers signed up. So first we have Paula Palmer, followed by Sue Douglas, and then Tom Isaacson. Paula Palmer is joining online. Paula, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yes.
Oh, good evening. It's nice to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm here representing Right Relationship Boulder, and I'd like to bring something to your attention about the design of the Fort Chambers site. We understand that the OSMP staff are preparing to present their design for the part of the property that has been called the Healing Trail soon. I think you know that the City of Boulder has become part of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, and that the Fort Chambers site specifically is to be developed as a site of conscience. Several OSMP staff members participated in a Sites of Conscience training last year. In case you're not too familiar with Sites of Conscience, I hope you'll Google it and learn how communities all around the world are commemorating places where terrible violations of human rights occurred in the past. But that's not all. At these sites, all sectors of the community also work together to bring about justice and healing in the present time. The Sites of Conscience motto is preserve memory, promote truth, pursue justice. I'll read a couple more quotes from the Sites of Conscience website. Sites of Conscience are dedicated to transforming places that preserve the past into spaces that promote civic action. And another, at Sites of Conscience, we harness the strengths of memory, arts, and culture to build more equitable, just, and peaceful communities today. We want to ask you to keep these descriptions of Sites of Conscience in mind when the OSMP staff present their plans for the Fort Chambers site. We hope you'll ask them, how is the Fort Chambers site going to promote civic action to build a more equitable and just community today? How will visitors be led to ask ourselves, what are the consequences today of the things that took place on this site in 1864? What do equity and justice mean when we see what the consequences of the Sand Creek Massacre have been for the Cheyenne and Arapaho, and what the consequences have been for the people living here today? We think Fort Chambers, as a site of conscience, offers Boulder a very valuable opportunity to wrestle with these questions. And we think we really can become a more equitable, just, and peaceful community as we do this together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Sue Douglas, followed by Tom Isaacson. Sue, you can come to the podium.
How's this?
Good.
My name is Sue Douglas. I live on Galena Way in South Boulder. Hello, trustees and staff. I am here to ask you to reconsider putting a new mountain bike trail in the West TSA. Let me point out just a few of the reasons. One, the West TSA process was years long, thorough, and collaborative. It resulted in delicate compromises and commitments to the mountain biking and its funding in other areas of the system. All user groups saw benefits and losses. The fact that the mountain bike community disagrees with the final result is no reason to create a horrible precedent, which will be repeated. Two, I am concerned that one of your stated reasons for a new bike trail to reduce the vehicle emissions from visitors is invalid. Please consider the added parking problems of illegal roadside parking along with overcrowded parking lots observed at Dowdy Draw and other trailheads which allow mountain biking. Unfortunately, bike trailhead access also creates a regional draw for bikers and would increase vehicle miles. 3, to reconstruct the Greenbrier Connector Trail or to construct a new adjacent one in a state natural area seems inappropriate. The present trail was a deliberate West TSA decision, honoring the need for a peaceful, easy visitor walking experience in an area which contains special plant assemblages needing preservation. When this trail opened, OSMP's Lynn Riedel led a group hike during which she pointed out Jersey tea, lead plant, and other specialties to us novices along the trail. There's an additional feature of the Greenbrier Connector, and it's perhaps the most important of all. This trail provides local users with their only nearby dog-free experience, where they will not be jumped on nor be forced to listen to the yelling commands or piercing loud barks. This is where people go for true relaxation. Will you be encouraging OSMP to disrespect this user group and displace them? Please leave this trail area for quiet recreation, conservation, and intended West TSA purposes that it provides. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Next, we have Tom Isaacson.
Good evening. Tom Isaacson speaking on behalf of the Boulder climbing community. I'm going to be addressing the issue of the Boulder Falls access. And as the memo from staff indicates to you, we did meet with staff once in person, a number of other communications. We very much appreciate the communication and outreach from staff on this, and we do support the proposal that staff has made to you. There is some very important climbing that we access that's above, sort of north of Boulder Falls. We call it, the most prominent one is called the Plotinus Wall. There's also the Berlin Wall, the Wall of Winter Warmth, which are historically significant destinations for climbing in the winter because they face south and pretty well protected from the wind. And before this most recent closure, we would just go in directly from along the same trail the tourists use, and then eventually go around to the wall itself. There is no other practical way of getting there by coming up from Sugarloaf. That's just way too far. It's difficult. It's snow covered back in, at least in the days when we had winters. And so the only practical way for climbers to get there is to come in from the Boulder Canyon side. In a perfect world, we would just retain the access that we've had by going in the tourist trail, but we recognize that's not realistic. With tourists going along, they're moving fairly slowly. They're stopping at the falls to take pictures, to enjoy the view. And, you know, they're at significant risk of getting hit by falling rock. And frankly, their expectation about taking risks is very different than what the climbers' expectations are. We accept that risk. It's just part of being a rock climber. And obviously most tourists would take a different view of that. So we completely understand why staff feels the need to close that trail and install a viewing platform. We're not experts on the engineering or the economics of putting in a viewing platform. That's for others to decide. But the key thing for us is that this proposal would preserve a way for climbers to access those climbs, not by going in the old tourist way, but by going a little bit farther up the canyon and then cutting across. It's not quite as convenient as the old way we used to do it, but it's a perfectly reasonable compromise that, you know, protects our interests in a slightly more roundabout way, while at the same time protecting, frankly, the city's important interests in keeping people out of the danger zone from all of that rock fall. So while it's in some ways a slight setback for us, it's one that we very willingly accept in the, you know, the broader interests of the city. And so we support the staff proposal and appreciate the staff's outreach to us. Thanks.
Thank you.
If you're joining online and would like to speak, you can raise your hand now. And we have a hand. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. I hit a wrong button, so I'm just going to just fix that. There we go. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so we have a hand from Lynn Siegel.
Yeah, this is a
Lynn,
better way to do it anyway, is to do it as panelists, because then everyone's up there and you can just highlight who you want. Like,
um,
I don't
so
know.
you are correct. Yeah, you should be able to unmute yourself. It sounds like you can, so you're all set now. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm done. Right. I'm just saying it's better to do it as a panelist than as just another speaker, because you can see everybody and you can highlight what you want, etc. Yesterday, I was cut off from the Prairie Dog annual update, and I am livid. I'm livid. Dan Burke heard me, and it was after I made my comment that I was cut off from the whole thing. And 3 times I tried to log in and I couldn't. The very day before, I was at Boston Workers Circle on a Yiddish Jewish thing, and someone hit the wrong button and everybody got deleted, and we all came back on. Well, this was something deliberate. I don't know who or what. I'm not making any accusations, but I am going to find out who it was. I want to know, and I want to talk to them, because I have a right to hear the prairie dog talk. And when it's only once a year, and what I have to talk about today is this endless development. And this is what I brought up about the prairie dogs. It's a fight between the humans and the prairie dogs, because we are taking over their territory. And the same thing goes for developers. Sundance, the Millennium, the 28th Street, the Colorado development, seven stories high, Naropa, actually I think it's even 8 stories high on Colorado, 7 stories up to 7 stories around Naropa. Dwarfing the Lincoln School. The reason these planning board issues are relevant to you is that, like, for example, the form-based code that even Lauren Kaplan developed and then wouldn't even vote for at 55th Street. This is really constraining for open space, because it's that the form-based code doesn't allow as much open space. They would have had 10 extra units. Well, they did get 10 extra units, or 10 units that they originally wanted, rather than having them deleted without form-based code. And you are just jam-packing people and then thinking that open space mountain parks can accommodate these people. No, you all know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know already. Why are you doing this? Why are you allowing this? This is obscene. It's like obscenities versus profanity, speaking on council. This is like not okay. So not okay. All of this development, 1844 Folsom, okay? Papelios, where Hoshimoto's was. It's endless. Stop already.
Thanks, Lynn.
If you're joining online and would like to speak, you can go ahead and raise your hand. We don't have any more hands.
Okay. All right, then I'm going to close public comment and move on to the next item on the agenda. And that is matters from the board. So this is our time to talk to the written information memos in the packet, or bring up other board issues, or speak to any of the public comment we just heard. So is there anybody who wants to speak from the board on this matter? Okay. So we did get 2 written information items, the Cultural Resources Management Plan and the Hub Office lease. No comments on either of those? Nope. Okay. Dan, do you have something?
Yeah, just to respond to a couple of things that were mentioned during open comment. It was mentioned that staff has identified a trail connection during our multimodal 7C project. I just want to clarify that where staff is at in the project, we have not identified any solutions to this point. That identification of solutions is later on in the project. So starting in Q2, Q3, that's when development of specific solutions that staff has identified will be brought forward. fully aware that community has started to identify a trail connection possibility that they're speaking to. I just want to make the difference that where we're at in the process, that staff has not provided any identification throughout the system of any measures in 7C yet. So just a quick clarification on that. And then also Paula Palmer mentioned that the board will be hearing more details about what we have been calling the Healing Trail. And just want to make note that that will be April 8th, the board meeting, in which we'll provide some more details of what that design is starting to take shape. So
Thanks, Dan. Okay. Well, I just wanted to say, you know, it's great that we've identified a source of funds for the Cultural Resources Management Plan, and I appreciated the history of how cultural resources have been managed over the years. So thanks for putting that together in the memo, and congrats on the lease up in Gun Barrel. And I just had a question. We had talked about refurbishing the property over on Cherryvale Road is the other option, and I wanted to know where that went.
yeah, so for those who may not be as aware of sort of where staff facilities are located on the open space system, so right now we are leasing a location that we call the OSMP Hub out on the 55th Street Flatirons Business Park location. Unfortunately, the renewal of that lease was not possible. So we are going to be leasing in an interim basis until the West City campus is built, an office building in the Gun Barrel Office Park area. So, and that will be for a 2+ year period. Those folks that are used to seeing us out at 55th Street, 2520 55th Street, starting in sometime in March, we will be relocating from that facility for a 2+ year period. Those areas that are on sort of permanently owned city lands that are managed for open space, we have a campus that we call our Cherryville campus. That's right now our ranger services are all located out there. There's actually 2 buildings out there. The rangers are in what we call the north building. The south building has been sort of closed up for a number of years. It had to be vacated for a number of different safety concerns and water issues and stuff. There are plans in the works to revitalize that building and bring that up to operational standards. And we have done some design work on what that would mean and what that would take, and working through the details of now that we know we're going to have the West Campus, what is the highest and best use for both those buildings where the Ranger Campus is located. Yeah, we can certainly come back to the board as those details start to be finalized and give you a clearer picture of what the Cherryville campus would look like. We also have the Operations Center, and that's located out on 75th Street near Arapahoe, and that's where all of our field crews, for the most part, operate out of. We have a 5-acre storage where all of our equipment, our materials for doing trails work, all that type of stuff, and that's located at that site. So that kind of gives you the flavor of where operations are located on the open space system. But you're right, there is some planning being done to revitalize that, what we call the mothball Cherryville South location.
Okay, thanks for all that background. Appreciate it. So if no trustee has, now Sarah's got something. Go ahead, Sarah.
It's not in the written and it wasn't directly in the public comment, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we had a major wind event there on the 19th. I believe that was about the 19th of December. And I really, I personally was on the tail end of my first chemotherapy treatments. I have a friend who had a son that had just been post-surgery. There was a lot in everyone's individual lives happening on top of the fact that it was the holidays. And I just really want to acknowledge how it felt like the city, and I know open space, really all came together to keep us all safe during that time, though we had to turn off the power. And also to just ask if there was anything, any reflections or lessons learned or anything you wanted to say about that, Dan, as a department, as open space. We've been working so hard on this fire prevention, fire resilience topic. I thought it might be nice to just share, take a minute for that.
Yeah, that's great. First of all, it's so nice to see you. and
Thanks.
at the meeting, and I hope things are going okay for you. I was planning to have some comments about the wind event during my director's comment, but
Oh,
Harmon,
great.
but if you want, I'd be happy to do it now, or we could wait for when that was scheduled.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna need that much time, and you can just directly, hit it, and Sarah can get her question answered, and
Yeah.
we can all thank you for I know it was a big undertaking, creating a closure on short notice like that. So go right ahead, and then you don't have to touch on it in matters from the department.
Yeah. So just a very brief context, as we all know what happened. There was 2 days, Wednesday. Let me see what the dates are: the 17th and the 19th of December, in which we had extreme wind events. I think 113 miles per hour was clocked up at NCAR. You can imagine that alone, what it does. But then we compounded that with the power safety, public safety power shutoff that Excel implemented. So we had this double whammy of an actual event plus a power shutoff. And so, yeah, the whole city came together. I served on what is called the policy committee, which is fire chief, Boulder police chief, Mike Chard from ODM, Office of Disaster Management, city manager's office. So that group was huddling over this 3-day period to make some high-level decision making. And out of that was the decision to close the open space system. That decision was made around 6:30 p.m. on Thursday night before the Friday wind event. So it was not the decision making is not meant to be a unilateral decision by me. I pick up the phone and push a button and the system's closed. It was a very deliberate decision made with meteorologist input and city manager input, fire chief. So anyway, but out of that, so I called our team, or we already were set up on our operations. We were already in disaster mode in terms of how we organize as a department. So I informed our group around 7 o'clock that night that we're closing the system. And by the next morning, we were actually managed to physically, in one way or the other, close off 55 of our most major trailhead and access points, and do a number of extraordinary things with the staff, basically many of them waking up to this decision. So it was a huge lift. We learned a lot going through it. And I would just like to say that by 9 a.m. on Saturday, the system was completely open again. So a lot of hands and a lot of work from across all of our work groups. You can imagine trails, trailheads, rangers. I'm going to miss so many that I'll stop there, but many people were impacted and rallied to it. We had an after action meeting, filled the room with, okay, how did things go? Lessons learned. What do we need to do? Is this going to be a more common thing in the future? Probably yes, in terms of these type of wind events. The National Weather Service actually issued something that they've never done before, which is called a particularly dangerous situation, or a PDS. That was the first time in Colorado they ever issued that. It may become more of common vernacular for us going forward. But what's that? What does that mean? Who makes the decision going forward for closing the system? I should mention that Boulder County also decided to close their open space system west of 36. So it was it impacted. It was a countywide sort of impacts there in terms of accessing our open space systems. But we're well aware of going forward that how do these decisions get made? What is the criteria? Even though every event's going to be a little bit unique, how does the decision-making process work? So there's that sort of policy decision of how decisions are made in the moment. But then the other question is what does it take to close an open space system to be effective? If it's short term, it may be a little bit of a different thing than if it has to be 2 or 3 or 4 days. But we realize that there's some infrastructure challenges for us to do things as effectively as probably what we would like to do. So we have a team right now that's looking at both the policy end of it and the decision-making process, as well as what does the infrastructure need, as well as the staff capacity needs to be able to pull something like this off. And so I've asked those teams to form their teams, work over the next, by end of Q1, and to bring those results back to the director's team and myself, where we could look at some things that may have to be part of future budgeting. We may have some infrastructure needs, for instance, as well as other future ways that we might want to organize as a staff. So a lot of great lessons learned in a situation where in the end, I just want to say we had no fires in open space, which is the biggest, objective. The other thing that we learned is that we have a great data out there of trail usage from our trail counters. So we were able to actually go in on Monday and Tuesday the next week and looked at the numbers and how effective our closures were. And the good news is it was very effective. We have very high compliance overall on those sites that were able to physically, through infrastructure, close off. At some sites, it was almost zero in terms of the people coming onto the system. On those systems where we had no infrastructure, we had still very high compliance, but some use on open space. And then those where we sort of had a hybrid structure, it wasn't as low as those physical structures, but it was a little bit higher compliance than in those where we had zero. So we learned some stuff from the data already of what we were able to ascertain from our after action review. So
Dan, when you talk about physically closing 55 points of access, what does that look like? I mean, what's the,
well, as some of you know,
what does it look like?
Yeah, in our Muddy Trail Closures program, the Muddy Trails Close program is meant to, it's not for extreme weather events, it's for after weather events where our trails are, it's better off to keep bikes and feet and horses off of them. Those, part of those systems of which ones are included in that is those ones we're able to have a gate at the trailhead and sort of physically close off the main access point.
But that's a ranger, a staff member, somebody going out there.
Yeah, we have a whole, we have a whole team of a Muddy Trail Closure team that works on the infrastructure side of that. Obviously, so we had a skinny version of what we deployed that Friday.
Okay.
But what we deployed that Friday was not only our those areas that are part of our Muddy Trail closures, but we went beyond that. Sometimes it was placing a truck in front of the driveway of the trailhead. I mean, we literally went to that level on some of the sites. So that's what we want to be sort of looking at is what are the infrastructure needs, mimicking those things that are very effective in our Muddy Trail Closure program.
So does this have you thinking at all about installing additional gates, additional physical infrastructure, so you don't have to go send 2 trucks out to leave one in front of a driveway?
Yeah, I think for some sites it's going to lend itself to that. Some sites it's not going to be feasible based on the design of that particular area. Then we have 110 access points, formal access points. Those are points of entry into our system that are not supported by a trailhead or a parking area. Those, some of them may be able to be closed, but signage may be the way, additional signage might be the way that we would want to go to. So it'd be more of an inform and looking for compliance. But I think some of the folks that were accessing our system were probably unaware that there was a closure because it came so quickly. So it would be a communications, hopefully more upfront communications, physical closures and infrastructure to support a closure, signage. It's going to be a whole mix, and that's what I'm looking forward to having the team come back and put that mix together and take a look at that. And I'd also say that whatever we come up with is going to be a phased approach. We're not going to be able to implement everything right away, so we'll have to determine what our highest priorities are.
Okay, thanks so much for that. Sarah, did you have any follow-ups? Great question.
No, that was really thorough, and again, just really, really grateful for all of the work. Nice job.
I just
Michelle's
wanted to
got it.
ask. I just wanted to ask a question, Harmon. Dan, what was the cleanup like afterward, and what was very notable about this particular wind event it wasn't just a regular old red flag day, whatever that is. We get a lot of those, but this one in particular knocked down a lot of branches and had the risk of hurting people who would be near trees. And so that was in addition to the fire risk, it was a danger to people on the trails.
That's right. We had flying projectiles. We had, I think we had 65 points that we had to go and monitor and remediate in terms of limbs, trees, debris, those type of things. So right away, we set up a spreadsheet and we were either we're getting staff reports or afterwards we were getting reports from the community of where we had damage and especially the fallen trees and limbs. But I can attest because I went out to my car on that Friday to try to move it from underneath the tree, and I got hit with a very small limb. And I can tell you that it's a dangerous situation when you're getting 80, 100-mile-per-hour winds with fallen limbs and trees. So you're absolutely right, Michelle. And that type of condition probably is going to feed into the criteria for when we would decide to do something like this. We want to differentiate between it's a gusty day, man, we should just close the system, versus it's actually unsafe to be out there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. John, any thoughts?
I just wanted to give kudos to, staff and getting that message out so quickly. I saw the message through several different channels that morning when it was announced. So I think y'all did a really great job, getting that message out there through all the different channels. So
Thank you.
Okay. And I'll just make one more. Did I turn off? No. I'll just make one more comment related to public comment before we move on to our first action item tonight. And it's just, we had public comment from the climbing community here tonight. And, I hope that you'll have a way as a community to make it clear if we're going to use an alternative trail to access the historic climbing sites up the canyon there, that's the way to do it, and that climbing up over whatever sort of viewing platform we create, and if that's the alternative that ends up getting built, and we'll talk more about that tonight, isn't appropriate. And, but thank you so much for coming out and educating us on that. Appreciate it a lot. All right, so we have a public hearing item tonight, which I guess I'll just read it into the record, and then we can have our presentation. It's consideration of a request for approval and recommendation to City Council to approve conveyance of a utility easement or similar land use agreement on, over, across, and under certain City of Boulder open space lands to the Public Service Company of Colorado, DBA Excel Energy, to install and maintain subsurface electric lines via open trenching or boring pursuant to the disposal procedures of Article 12, Sections 175 and 177 of the City of Boulder Charter. I'll turn it over to staff.
Great. We've got, I believe Bethany is going to be the lead presenter on this. Bethany is our Real Estate Services Senior Manager. Yeah, I don't know if I'll provide an entry on this because it's fairly straightforward, and I think Bethany can handle it. So, of course you can.
What can't Bethany?
She doesn't need any help from me.
I think she can do it.
She can do it.
Well, now staff are going to say when I do an intro that I like, why did he do that for me?
Well, and we thank you, Dan, and good evening, trustees. We did do a bit of an intro or a briefing on this last month as well. So, so we're here tonight to talk about a request from Excel Energy for a utility easement or similar land use agreement to install and maintain subsurface electric lines within OSMP managed lands on the western edge of the city. So we'll have this short presentation and then, of course, time for questions. Next slide. So the location of this request and proposed project is a corridor between Sunshine Canyon Drive and Boulder Canyon Drive in the area of the People's Crossing and Centennial Trailheads and Red Rocks and Anemone Trails. The city's Sunshine Hydro Plant, the Silver Lake Ditch, Excel Transmission Line, and important water and broadband utilities are also located in this corridor. So you're seeing on this slide kind of the existing and the area we're talking about in the left and middle slide, and then some of the important utility infrastructure that they're working around on the right slide, or the right picture. Next slide, please. For some background, Excel currently owns and operates 2 electric feeders in this corridor. They were installed in the early 1980s within a 20-foot easement granted by the city. These lines are critical to the city's electric framework and feed important public facilities, residents, and businesses within the city. The infrastructure has aged, and recent faults have been repaired with limited success. With only one of the feeders currently operating, this portion of the grid has had increased outages, and this service area is particularly vulnerable to strain like high usage seen with warmer weather. Next slide. This vulnerability has created an emergent project need to replace the failing infrastructure. Excel and city staff have prioritized the design and agreements to facilitate this work, which needs to occur before anticipated high loads with summer heat. The work is anticipated to take 8 to 12 weeks and be installed through a combination of boring and trenching, some of which is dependent on the geotech conditions encountered as the work progresses. Next slide. That's all right. Actually, go back to the previous slide. So I know that some questions came up of do we know what they're asking for yet? And they have presented to us some initial designs which look like what you're seeing on the right. And so the reason these aren't in your packet is they're obviously engineering designs and pretty conceptual, and are also somewhat difficult to read, but also because, again, some will depend on the on the ground conditions as they progress. Next slide. So because the existing feeder must remain energized during replacement, and there are 8-foot spacing requirements for these electrical facilities, installation cannot occur within the existing easement corridor in most areas. However, the proposed corridor in this request avoids impacts to Centennial Trailhead and generally follows the same alignment, which already has existing utilities, trail, fencing, and other infrastructure. It would also be field adjusted based on actual topographic, geotech, and resource conditions, and to avoid other utilities. While the initial construction will have surface disturbance, OSMP program staff have not expressed concern with the alignment or identified sensitive or rare resources along the corridor. Additionally, cultural resource staff would be on site during any excavation to monitor for any artifacts. The final utility corridor will be 25 feet wide to accommodate the feeders and vaults, and the existing easement will be terminated once this project is completed. Next slide. So again, we're looking at these sketches which support the initial design work and reflect both the complexity of the existing utilities as well as the trails, roads, and disturbed areas within the corridor. They're very, again, hard to see over the aerial, and the green is meant to reflect the conceptual new alignment as it parallels and crosses the existing electric feeders. So the images in these slides begin at the south and move north. So where the south is, the left image starts at Canyon and moves to the north. So really all there is to glean out of this is kind of a comparison of what you're seeing in red, which are the existing feeders, and green, and you see that they are pretty aligned in corridor. But they do have to be offset because of the spacing required for the existing versus new feeders. Next slide. And again, these are images moving north, and you see Sunshine Hydro in the left image, and then you get to the area of Centennial Trailhead and Sunshine Canyon Drive on the right. Next slide. So benefits to the city and public of this upgraded underground utility infrastructure include increased and more reliable connectivity to important city infrastructure, including Sunshine Hydro, which handles about 1/3 of the treated water supply for the community. It also meets city strategic plan and SER framework to provide high levels of service for water delivery, renewable energy generation, and well-maintained and reliable public infrastructure. It also has improvement of infrastructure within open space land that is currently failing and requires more maintenance access and could pose outage and fire risks. Next slide. So as I wrap up, I'll remind you all about the process in place for considering and carrying out this work. Interest in open space land may not be conveyed or agreed to, such as for utility easements and installation of public utility infrastructure without compliance with the disposal or licensing provisions of Article 12, Section 175 and 177 of our city charter, which requires OSBT recommendation for licenses and approval and recommendation to city council for disposals. Additionally, disturbance to OSMP land is anticipated at bore pits, fault locations, and where trenching is required, and the utility installation and restoration will be governed by a temporary access and construction agreement. And the final easement or land use agreement will include provisions for ongoing access for maintenance and repair needs, as well as reversionary terms if the corridor is no longer needed or otherwise abandoned. Next slide. So that brings us to the staff recommendation, motion recommendation, and questions from the board. Please note on here, I have an asterisk and some bold. We have made a couple small edits to the proposed motion from what you see in your packet for consistency with charter provisions.
Okay, great. Just make sure you leave that slide up when it's time to make the motion.
Yeah, and Leah has the new
Okay.
language as well.
Thank you. All right. So this is a public hearing item. So the way this is going to work is that we're going to have some time to ask questions. It's not the time for the trustees to opine or to deliberate, but rather to ask clarifying questions. And after we're done with that, we'll open it up for public comment, and then we'll deliberate and hopefully arrive at a motion and a vote. So any trustee questions? None from John, none from Sarah. Michelle? None from Michelle, none from me. Okay, so we'll open it up for public comment on this matter.
We don't have anyone signed up to speak in person. If you'd like to speak online on this matter, you can raise your hand now. No hands.
Okay, so we'll close public comment and bring it back to the board for
Apologies,
deliberation.
we did just get a hand. I'm sorry.
Oh, just
to
going?
interrupt.
Okay, we'll
Yeah.
reopen public comment.
Okay. Lynn Siegel, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
I was just waiting to see if someone else was going to speak. You know, no one ever speaks on these issues, and I wonder why. How come nobody's speaking on this public hearing issue? How come I'm the only one? I'm just a curious person. Sounds like you're not reaching out enough. You're not engaging the community. You know, this is some undergrounding from Excel. It's a pretty hot topic now. Nobody's speaking. I'll tell you one thing. You know, the expense, the deficit we have on open space mountain parks, the huge deficit that we have could be solved easily by getting out of Gaza and divesting from the Middle East. Now, this Excel project, it's great. It's undergrounding in this area, but I spent 3 hours last night working on municipalization, and we have some really good options coming up to not necessarily just extricate ourselves, although that would probably really be necessary from Excel, to be able to have our own energy to run through the lines. We have to own their antiquated system. But with the profit of $25 million a year, you know, that Excel takes in, we'll have plenty to mess around with. And if we're out of Gaza, you'll be swimming in funds to pay for all this mass of humanity coming from Sundance and everything that's coming to this to impact open space and mountain parks. So I highly recommend, you know, that you do something about it. And, you know, when you've got Harman Zuckerman on your board, and he's been on planning board for years, you know, I don't really understand why he's on this board. And I feel like some people should actually be sequestered from being on the board for conflict of interest. But in any case, I guess this system looks, you know, like it's okay. I'm glad anytime any undergrounding is happening. But meantime, when PSPSs are going on and Excel doesn't have to pay, I mean, they aren't getting any income, let's put it that way, when they're doing power shutoffs. But if it's more beneficial for them than a $3 billion fire, when they don't listen to their own internal employee who reported the detached wire in Marshall, and Michael Dougherty wouldn't prosecute. We have to wait years and years, and then we get, 700 million.
Thanks, Lynn. You're out of time. All right. Any other public comment?
No other hands.
Okay. All right. We'll close public comment and turn it over. Deliberation of the board. Are there any board members who want to start talking about this? John?
This seems like a reasonable ask to maintain existing infrastructure on open space land, so I'm supportive.
Yeah, I'll just say, John, that and for the rest of the trustees, that I had some concerns about this one. And one of the concerns was, why do we have to? Why are we being asked to approve a disposal when we don't even have a legal description for the land that we're disposing of, which is unusual? And the answers were satisfying to me. So one is that there is a real time pressure on this, and because of all the other things that Excel has to do to get ready and staged and get this thing moving, they really need to get the right now. Another piece was that the new alignment can't go very far from the existing alignment, and the entire area that it could go in has been walked by OSMP staff, and we know what kind of environmental conditions there are, what kind of cultural resources there are not in that corridor. So wherever it ends up within that corridor, it's already been studied. It's not like it's going to jump the corridor and go to a place where there's some great cultural resource that it's going to challenge. So to me, that, as well as the fact that remediation is required, and Excel is going to abandon the existing easement in lieu of the new one. It seems like a pretty well considered operation here, and I'll be voting in favor of it. Any other deliberation comments? No? Okay. I'll entertain a motion. Could we get the motion language up, please?
I'll move that the Open Space Board of Trustees make a motion to approve and recommend that OSMP and City Council approve conveyance of a utility easement or similar land use agreement on, over, across, and under certain City of Boulder open space lands to the Public Service Company of Colorado, DBA Xcel Energy, to install and maintain subsurface electric lines via open trenching or boring pursuant to the disposal procedures of Article 12, Sections 175 and 177 of the City of Boulder Charter.
Is there a second?
Second that.
Was that you, Michelle?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion from Trustee Carroll, a second from Estrella. Take a roll call vote. Trustee Glenn?
Sorry about that. Yes.
Trustee Carroll?
Yes.
Trustee Estrella? Is Michelle still on?
She is. Michelle, we saw you unmute yourself. Do you mind doing that just one more time? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and I'll vote yes, so the motion passes 4-0. Robinson absent, and we'll move on to the next public hearing item, which is consideration of a request for approval and recommendation to City Council to approve conveyance of approximately 0.42 acres of city property managed as open space located along Arapahoe Road, together with 2 temporary construction easements to Colorado Department of Transportation for highway improvements to Colorado State Highway 7 Arapahoe Road, pursuant to the disposal procedures of Article 12, Sections 175 and 177 of the City of Boulder Charter. Back to you, staff.
Mark, you deserve an opening rant from me.
I thought we got a good one.
No, the only thing I do want to say before Mark leads us into this presentation is the Arapahoe Improvement Project is something that we provided it hasn't been too recent, so some of you, this may be a new concept of approving this, but this has been a project that's been conceived and thought of for many years. We provided this board with various forms of written or verbal information about this. This particular one is looking at very, very specific safety concerns at a couple of different locations that do impact open space. And over the years, this project will probably bring us together for other components of the safety improvement project. But so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Mark.
And Mark, I want you to know that just like we have the confidence that Bethany can handle it, we know you can.
Thank you, Harmon. Mark Verducci, Senior Property Agent with Real Estate Services. For Open Space Mountain Park is going to present the Awita Kolb Woodley Open Space Disposal this evening. Next slide, please. This agenda item is consideration of a request from the Colorado Department of Transportation for the disposal of 3 parcels of land and 2 temporary construction easements to allow for the Colorado Highway 7 Intersections Improvements Project. Next slide. This is a vicinity map just showing the location of the property disposal relative to the city of Boulder. Next slide. So this is a map taken from the CDOT's project website for the Highway 7 Intersections Improvements in Lafayette, which gives a good overview of the entire project. CDOT is proposing to construct improvements to 3 intersections on Highway 7 at Willow Creek Drive, at Park Lake Drive, and at 95th Street. Left turn lanes will be added at the Willow Creek Drive and Park Lake Drive intersections. The intersection at 95th Street will include 2 through lanes in both directions, a dedicated eastbound bus lane, multi-use paths, and other improvements. The request from CDOT for the city property only pertains to the Willow Creek Drive project area, which is on the left in this map. Next slide. And so kind of a close-up of that area. This is the location map showing the project area at Willow Creek Drive. The properties that are shaded in green are fee-owned open space properties. All of the property that CDOT is requesting is on the north side of Highway 7, both to the east and west of Willow Creek Drive. The 3 polygons shown in solid colors are the permanent right-of-way requests, which total 0.42 acres. And the 2 polygons shown in cross-hatching are the temporary construction easements, which total 0.09 acres. Next slide. So the next 2 slides, these just are a couple of photos just to give you an idea, some perspective on the area. So these are the areas of the right-of-way requests and temporary easements to the west of Willow Creek Drive. Next slide. And this photo is of the right-of-way request to the east of Willow Creek Drive. And next slide, please. Benefits to the city from this project include reducing congestion and safety improvements to Arapahoe Road. And CDOT will pay appraised value for the property interests and also for restoration of the temporary easement areas after construction. The appraisals are pending, but the total land and temporary easement value is estimated to be $20,000 to $25,000. Next slide. Staff is supportive of this disposal to CDOT, and we have provided a recommended motion for the board. And next slide. And that's really just thank you for considering this request. And if you have any questions, we will try to answer them for you.
Okay. Same procedure. We'll ask clarifying questions or informational questions, and then open it up for public comment. Any questions from the board? So I just have one question. I didn't see anything in the packet around undergrounding that line that runs probably through the area where the road is going to be widened. I mean, is that something that we're asking CDOT to do as part of their project? And is it something we'd be interested in? I mean, it seems like at this point in time, the more we can get projects requiring undergrounding as a condition of the disposal, the better. And, it improves our scenic values and our resilience. It could be something that I just missed.
We can certainly ask. The one caveat I would say is because there is a potential or a planned future project that would widen even further. They may not know where to bury them as part of this particular project, and so it may be something we table and ask in the future. But we can certainly bring it up and put them on notice that either with this project or the next proposed project that we might see, that we would be asking for that. So that's a great question.
Okay.
Boulder County does tend to ask for a lot of undergrounding, although when it is along right of ways, not so much. So we can certainly ask for that consideration.
Okay. I guess I'll open it up for public comment.
We don't have anyone signed up to speak in person. If you'd like to speak and you're joining online, you can raise your hand now. Okay, we do have one hand right now. Lynn Siegel, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is great. Should be undergrounded. What we need to do is make Xcel Energy irrelevant. But to do this, we need dollar bills, right? And how we're going to do that is that we're going to take the profit that Xcel makes every year and use it for ourselves. Because it's unconscionable. Bigger is not better. High frequency, high energy transmission lines are not what I want. I want distributive solar, transactive energy, microgrids, and storage, and transfers between different parts of town, and a balancing of the grid, basically, in place of base load coal. And that's how we do it. And we need the money. And so we should divest from Israel. We should.
Lynn, I want you to tie it back to this matter, which is
Oh,
disposal
yeah.
of this property,
This is
or
the
we're
matter.
going to have to move on from you, okay?
Yeah, it's disposal of this property. Yes, right. It should be. Yeah, we should have undergrounding. Yeah. What do you want me to say, Harmon?
Well, I just want you to refer to this matter because this is public comment
This
on
matter.
this.
This matter is money. Divestiture from Israel. That's a lot of money. Everything you talk about in this board is about money. So it's not off topic, Harmon, unless you want to speak for me. You wanted to speak for me? Since I'm not worthy of speaking, even though I'm the only lousy one that's here speaking? Is that what you want to do, Harmon?
Hey, Lynn, you got a minute left.
I'm sorry that, you spent so many years building this city up into something that we can't manage anymore. That's expensive for us. It's great that Xcel's doing this, that we're doing this disposal for Xcel now, for them to do this undergrounding. But why all of this traffic on Arapahoe to start with? It's because of everything you did on planning board to overdevelop this place and drive up the population. And Sundance coming, it's just obscene what's happened to Boulder. My dad complained about this in 1949 when he went to see you. He complained the population here was too much then. People can't, there's no diversity, equity, inclusion. It's just a high-end town. And we need some integrity. We need some reason.
Thanks, Lynn. Appreciate it. Okay. It's time to deliberate unless we have other public comment.
No other hands.
Okay, I'm going to close public comment. Any board comment? Nothing from Estrella. Sarah, nothing? John? Okay, so, how is it that we want to, I think it's pretty important that we see if Xcel will underground this as part of this project. I've seen a lot of public planning processes where, as a condition of approval of a subdivision along a county road that doesn't have a bike lane, the subdivider is required to put in a bike lane, and they squeal about that and say, well, there's no bike lane for 5 miles in either direction. Well, it's like, how are we going to get started? And there's always local benefits. If you're riding a bike on a road with no bike lane and suddenly there's 700 feet of protected bike lane, that feels really good. If you're going down a road that has telephone poles and overhead electric, and all of a sudden, it looks like the landscape again for 700 feet, that feels really good. So I'd like to see if folks have any interest in adding something to our motion that we ask Excel to underground the portion of electric line, that overhead electric, that they're going to have to relocate as part of this project.
I would be supportive of that.
Yeah, so would I.
Okay. Well, then maybe a motion that has a little rider attached to it that says that, staff will work with Excel. That we recommend that staff work with Excel to explore undergrounding the portion of the overhead electric that is in the proposed easement area.
Could I ask for a clarifying? Would the
Please.
language tie that to the approval, or because there could be a number of reasons why this section can't be underground, and we wouldn't want to come back to you and then ask for a new disposal measure and have to run the whole disposal process through.
I think if we word it that, we recommend that staff work with Excel to, work on to discuss the feasibility of, and I just don't think attaching a condition of approval
Okay, I
is
just want to make it
necessarily
clear.
what
Okay.
we're wanting to do right now.
Okay.
Especially given what Bethany said about the stacking projects.
Can we ask that CDOT work with Excel rather than that?
Sure.
Because we don't want to necessarily have a financial burden
Yeah.
created by
Yeah.
us working with
Okay.
them. So at least, or you could say staff and CDOT,
Sure.
if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. You want to make a motion?
I'll give it a go. I'll move that the Open Space Board of Trustees make a motion to approve and recommend that City Council approve the conveyance of 3 fee parcels totaling approximately 0.2 acres and 2 temporary easements totaling approximately 0.09 acres from the City of Boulder's Iowata 1, Woodley, and Kolb Brothers open space properties to the Colorado Department of Transportation for the CO7 intersection improvements project pursuant to the disposal procedures of Article 12, Section 175 and 177 of the City of Boulder Charter. In addition, we would like to ask that the
board recommends.
in addition, the board recommends that CDOT work with XL to underground the existing electric line that runs along the property.
Take a second. Oh.
Yes, so sorry. In addition, the board recommends that CDOT work with XL to underground the existing electric line that runs along the property. Does that seem reasonable?
I'm with you.
Since you're the only lawyer in the room, we've got some law degrees people here, but would you see that last sentence being conditional in any way? And would there be any words or stuff that could end any possibility of having a connection there of if that doesn't happen, that it's not tying it to the other?
We can add if feasible at the end or something along those lines.
Yeah.
I guess I was going to throw out the question here. Is this the best place for, I really understand the sentiment that this is an opportunity for us to put it in here, and to put this stake in the ground, or the line in the ground, so to speak. And is this the best place for us to is there a place in our policy or procedures or manuals where this could become commonplace, that every single any opportunity that we have to bury lines, we're encouraging that? What, I don't know. I don't understand the bigger picture. Um, and I wouldn't want to necessarily hold this up. I also wouldn't want to miss the opportunity if this feels like the best place to assert this, if that makes sense.
So, Sarah, if you're asking me, I would say that, what I heard Bethany say is that it tends to be the county's policy to require it. I didn't see that this was required as part of our packet and what information we were given, and I think it's an opportunity to ask for it. If in the future it becomes policy, if this board can influence, the policy making for OSMP, so that it becomes more sort of a regular everyday occurrence, where when we're disposing of property with overhead electric on it, the condition of the disposal is undergrounding, unless it's not feasible, that's fine. But I think, for now, we're just talking about this one project, and I'd like to see it be part of the motion.
Okay.
It is part of the motion. I'd like us to vote on it. Or
Okay.
at least get a second first.
Well, the if feasible line here, so then I'll get right into this. The if feasible, that seems pretty nebulous. Who's determining feasibility? What are the metrics for that? I mean, is there any way that we can improve that language?
Well, I think
Also,
Yeah,
also
I'm
when-
open to suggestions.
also wonder if we substituted the word request for recommend. I mean, it's just a request.
Mhm.
Does that help?
So you're suggesting we change recommends to requests?
Yeah. I don't know if that makes it more suggestive and not conditional.
I think it's stronger to request than to recommend.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I think recommendation is a softer language there.
Could we
But I feel
say-
like Sarah's asking for stronger language here.
Could we say make all possible attempts, or make best? My brain doesn't function the same, you guys, right now. So I do need help wordsmithing, actually. I'm not going to be the wordsmith. But there's a best attempt to underground the existing line, rather than if feasible. Something along the lines of, good faith effort or.
Mm-hmm. I think I hear you. So after the word Excel and two.
Well, it's Excel that's got to do the undergrounding.
Yeah.
So I actually think it's good the way it is.
Okay. I will.
Yeah.
I won't. I'm not hung up on it. I'm happy to
go
with this if you guys feel good about it.
Yeah, and I think the feasible part is meant to be nebulous, because unless we're willing to apply a condition of approval to a disposal at this point, then the feasible makes it clear that it's not an actual hard and fast condition of approval.
Yeah, and I don't think we're in a place to ask for a hard and fast condition of approval. I mean, staff is telling us that may not be a good idea. I think the ask for future disposals might be, hey, if you could, come with information on if it might be feasible to make that a requirement in the future, that would be helpful for the board. But for this one, I think a strong recommendation, but not requiring it, would be best.
Agreed.
Fantastic. I think undergrounding all power lines in this entire area is absolutely something. I'm a strong proponent of that, and I love that we're including it in here. I think it's fantastic.
Okay, so I will make the motion as written on the screen.
Looking for a second.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion from Carol, seconded by Glenn. And we'll do a roll call vote. Carol? Got you right when you were drinking.
Right as I was having my coffee. Yes.
Glenn?
Yes.
Estrella? Okay. Let the record show that Michelle Estrella
sorry,
said
Michelle,
yes.
do you mind doing that one more time?
Yes, I'm not sure. Maybe my audio is delayed. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and I'll vote yes, so the motion passes 4-0.
Great.
Okay, pretty quick
Mark,
meeting
Bethany, thank you so
tonight, huh?
much. All right, moving over from matters of the department, we have 2 items for you tonight. We're going to start with our continual discussion with the board about Boulder Falls. I think we were before you early in the fall, late summer, August, Hillary is telling me. So Hillary Deast, our senior manager of visitor infrastructure, is here to give you the latest of geotechnical findings that are leading to our staff recommendation up to this point, and updating you on that. So,
And at exactly 7:15, which is the time that your matter was supposed to start on the agenda. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
You're doing great already.
yeah. Well, I won't tell you. I even saved time by bringing 15 minutes from C up. So we're running ahead.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. Hello, everyone. As introduced, I'm Hillary Deese, Visitor Infrastructure Senior Manager, and I am providing an update on Boulder Falls. So just quickly, for my presentation, I plan on talking about how we got here, what happened at the falls, additional site notes and considerations that we've learned and talked about and discussed since I came to you in August, talk about how we evaluated our alternatives and also what our next steps are. And just a beautiful photo of snow at Boulder Falls because I would like it to snow again someday up there. So just a reminder, here's what the site looks like. This is an aerial pointing to the east. East is up, I guess, in this case. So we have Colorado Highway 119, Boulder Canyon. The Boulder Falls Trail comes right off of that road out of a parking area. It's about 500 feet with minimal elevation gain, and it terminates with a really wonderful view of the falls. In November of 2024, Veterans Day weekend more specifically, there was a catastrophic rockfall that destroyed the infrastructure highlighted on the screen. So we have an upper gabion basket and a lower gabion basket that acted as rockfall protection. Those gabion baskets are big metal mesh baskets that are filled with stone, meant to stop modest rockfall. The lower gabion basket failed entirely. The upper gabion basket is still intact partially, but the eastern part of that also failed, and then the viewing area was damaged. The consultants that we hired after this rockfall incident estimated that was about 100 cubic yards of material that came down. Here's some photos of some of the largest rocks. These are, for reference, the size of a Camry up to a small SUV. They estimated that some of these stones bounced as high as 8 feet tall based on the scars of the trees, which is never something you want to have in the same sentence, as these big rocks are bouncing down the hill. Previous estimates suggest that bounce heights of 17 feet could be achieved in a large enough rockfall incident. Oops, sorry, I'm gonna go back one slide and show myself my notes. Maybe. That's right. I pulled it up online and not the hard copy, so I'm gonna fly blind. But just to summarize in August, I talked about it in more in depth. But the big takeaway from the consultants that we hired is that this is a really, really dangerous area. It's one of the top 10 most dangerous rockfall areas in the state if you use CDOT's analysis tools. And so for those reasons, we determined then that we would not be opening the falls back up to its previous area, and that we'd pursue a few different alternatives in the interim, which is what this map is. So at that time in August, I came out and said that we were pursuing an alternative, which is labeled number 1. It would be a viewing platform about halfway down the trail. Alternative 2 would be a viewing platform much closer to the road. And then 3 would be permanent closure. And I will be talking about all these in more detail. But before that, I wanted to talk about some additional site evaluations. So the other thing that I said was the next step in August was that we wanted to get geotechnical analysis completed, not just above where the old viewing area was, but all the way to the road, to really understand the entire site. And if there were any areas that were either marginally or materially more safe than that previous viewing area. This photo is of a rock that is still there, but at the very top of the ridge, just waiting to fall down the gully that is right above the viewing area. So it is still very much an active and dangerous rockfall zone. The rest of the site is also characterized by very high rockfall hazards, slightly less high, but still within that very dangerous area. Sorry, very dangerous and high risk area. We also did what Jeff calls my investigative reporting. So I went back through as far as I could back to 1993 in our records to figure out how often it's been closed. I looked at the daily camera archives, pulled up any kind of time that we've paid for any work done, anytime we've had crews out there, adjusted all the costs for everything. And it was a little startling, but the trail has been closed 55% of the time since the 1st of January of 2009. So going back almost 15 years, it's been closed more than it's been open. And that's through rockfall incidents. That's because of the flood and damage from the flood, for construction, for reconstruction. So it's an area that is very often closed because of the geologic conditions around it. In addition, the other kind of startling number was once we started adding up how much we've been putting into this area to keep it open through mitigation, through trail work, through climbing access, construction, flood repairs, it's extremely expensive, like industry-wide, but especially for our system. So then even the next most comparable trail that I could find numbers for was Sanitas, and those are the grant-funded repairs that we're conducting right now, and that's a fourfold less expensive than this trail. So those are just some of the things that we're thinking about when we're trying to analyze, like, what is the next best thing for Boulder Falls, is taking a step back and really looking at it and how can we have the most available visitor experience? What does that look like? And so this is all part of that evaluation that we've been doing. We also wanted to understand our visitors a little bit more and how they use the site. So as we know, I mean, I take my family and friends there all the time who are visiting in town. 89% of folks did report through the most recent POVES survey that they came with family and friends. There's also a much higher proportion of folks who are visiting with children. So I believe the system-wide average is in the single digits. So quite a bit higher here. 75% of people reported visiting open space for the first time. Boulder Falls was their entry to our really wonderful system, which is really lovely to hear. And then on top of that, thinking about, site design, how do we make something that's going to be useful for the most people? Wanted to understand how long people were spending there. And most people are spending quite a short time there. So almost half of folks are spending less than half an hour. And then when you see who's there for an hour or less, it's the majority of people. Of the respondents who said they were there for more than 2 hours on the survey, those folks were climbing. So they were continuing on past the falls in the lower Dream Canyon to climb. When we looked at the different alternatives, we wanted to make sure that we were giving everything a fair shake. So these are the criteria that we developed to compare apples to apples. So we looked at 3 overarching, ideas. We wanted to talk about safety, the visitor experience, and then the feasibility and the cost. So in terms of safety, risk of rockfall wherever somebody is standing, and then also emergency egress out of Lower Dream Canyon is really important. And so we went on a site visit with our first responders to the site, figured out what their needs were, how do they use the site, how often, started to understand that a little bit better. The visitor experience, we know people are obviously there for the falls. Climbing access is also very important there. We also wanted to consider a seasonal safety closure, which had been in place from 2009 until the flood, and then post-flood, we had not closed it seasonally, which previously was November 1, a closure from November 1 to May 1. So we wanted to think about that as well. And then what would crowding feel like? This is our second most visited site after Chautauqua. So it's lots of people coming in and out. And so we wanted to make sure that it felt like a nice experience as well. And then there's the feasibility. Can we build it? How much will it cost? And when we talk about costs here, we're also talking about mitigation, construction, ongoing maintenance, and what is the future risk? Is there going to be another flood? Is there going to be another giant rockfall? Are we setting ourselves up for success in that way? So thinking about all those things, I'm going to run through the 3 alternatives real quick. So alternative 1, this was the interior viewing platform. The blue circles are very conceptual of what we were thinking about. It would need to be like kind of 2-tiered because it's very narrow there and there's not a ton of room to actually queue up and see the falls. So we were thinking about a 2-tiered system. This has the best view of the falls. Obviously, it's the closest. You still get the loud rip roaring, like, awe of the falls right there. However, there were some things that weren't as great for this one. So we were not able to think of a way to have the site design allow for concurrent climbing access where we could keep climbers who are engaging in a higher risk activity continuing onto their climb while keeping people who are just expecting a very safe, easy hike in a safe, easy area and not having them go past that into an unsafe area. Also, this had the highest cost to mitigate. So this would require rockfall fencing basically from the road to this viewing area. And that fence, it's kind of a one and done. It gets a rockfall event on it, and then you have to replace the whole entire thing. There's no just maintenance, which there was another thing we learned about all the different kind of rockfall fencing, all the different ways you can install it, the different types. We considered things like, could we pull the rockfall fencing in the winter, have a winter safety closure? Would that help mitigate the cost, but then the infrastructure is at risk? And then if the posts that the rockfall fence is on get hit, you still need to replace it, and you also need specialty contractors to do that. So the costs just kept adding up. So ultimately we said, okay, let's price this out with the fence staying in place, and it still is really significant. And obviously we don't know. We don't know how often there will be rockfall. We don't know how the scale, the size, anything along those lines. And this would require a seasonal safety closure. So that November 1 to May 1 is what the consultants recommended, partially because the freeze thaw is one of the reasons of the mechanics for creating the rockfall as it pushes some of those loose rocks down. So alternative 2 was presented as a roadside viewing platform. The area highlighted in orange on the top left does represent some rockfall hazards. However, very handily, there's this giant other rock face that does not have rockfall risk, and the turquoise in the bottom center represents a very safe area that does not have rockfall hazards associated with it. So that is where we were looking at putting the roadside viewing platform. This one does provide a view of the falls, albeit it is, obviously physically farther away. Falls don't look quite as big. You don't get that like awe-inspiring. You have to yell to your friends and family while you're there to hear over the falls. But you are at a higher elevation. You do get to see in a Lower Dream Canyon, which is a very cool kind of new experience for that area. Excuse me. We believe that we could get a similar square footage for visitors. So the crowding and just the feeling of how you'll be there with other visitors would be approximately the same. This option does allow for a separated climbing access. So our visitors who are there for the falls could have their experience, our climbers could have their experience. They would be separated. The site design for both of those we feel very confident about. This also has the moderate mitigation costs. Excuse me. No, good, thanks. This is still a little bit of an unknown. So there was some conversation with the consultants about what this could look like, but we would want to get a second opinion about that as it pertains to also doing the construction. This option also has the most minimal of the ongoing maintenance costs and would be open year round. And finally, the third alternative that we were considering was, service. Thanks. Would be a permanent closure. And this is a picture of the temporary fence that's there now. And so if we were to pursue a permanent closure, this would be replacing this with a permanent fence that is likely bolted in on either side to prevent people from trespassing. So without further ado, John asked if there would be a conceptual drawing. This is, I'm not an artist. This is my attempt at this, and the next time I come, it will be much more beautiful. But the idea is that we would put people in what had previously been highlighted in that cyan, that blue color, up and over into the, like, you know, the shadow of this really wonderful large stone. It is a very cool experience. I took director's team up there, and it's very intimate. It's different than anything we have on our system. And so the other thing, I did have to tell everybody put their imagination caps on when we were out there. But the other thing to think about is this isn't, you know, I'd like to take credit for this wonderful idea, but I did do a lot of research also about how other people manage waterfalls, waterways, canyons. So I'm not actually sure where the photo on the right is from, but the photo on the left is Ouray Box Canyon, I believe it's called. So there's so there's a bunch of other places that are doing similar things and having visitors in a similar way with this kind of like really heavy, like you're in a rock face, you're looking out at water. This also, we like the idea of this partially because of the concern with ice and snowpack up there for folks going in the winter, that could get compacted. We like that this would have clear drainage. We think this would be relatively easy to engineer, relatively low cost, low maintenance. So that is the preferred alternative that we are seeking feedback on. That is not what that's supposed to look like. Well, we're at the middle with the big yellow star. The next one says public outreach as needed. So I can very briefly let you all know that we gave a heads up to City Council. I'm coming to you tonight. I went out last week with Channel 8 Boulder News because the news did pick up this story last time I was here. So we've preemptively gone out for them, recorded some footage, did some talk, like showed them all, you know, what the different alternatives are. Yeah. Oh, that would be great. Thank you, Sam. And we can test if I knew what was under all my. Yeah, I got the next one right. All right. Thank you. So community outreach. So really doing a more targeted outreach for this next bit, and then as needed, you know, throughout the rest of this project. Engaging in design and engineering, hopefully starting as soon as this year in terms of getting the preferred alternative 2, you know, is it constructible? What does permitting look like? What mitigation needs to happen so that we can get a better cost estimate? Coming back to you all, hoping Q3, maybe early Q4 of this year with some of those numbers and you know, some better conceptual drawings, hopefully as well. And then implementation would be at the very earliest 2027, and that would be through CIP. But again, that's obviously dependent on other priorities and what the CIP picture looks like and funding picture looks like. So those are what we're thinking about for next steps for this. Oh, sorry. Thank you. So questions that I have for you all is, do you have any questions about how we arrived at our preferred alternative? Anything I can talk about with that evaluation? And is there anything that you would like us to consider as we, you know, seek out other design and engineering for getting closer to what the experience might be like at Boulder Falls?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a pretty big deal. We have one of the most popular visitation sites in the entire system, 260,000 people a year, and want to make sure that the public knows that it's seriously being considered and that there's a robust public process. And it looks like you've laid that out over the next 9 months or so, maybe concurrently with some preliminary engineering work. So if that preferred alternative or another is selected, we can kind of hit the ground running. So appreciate the amount of time. We have about 30 minutes budgeted for discussion. I'm not sure we'll need it, but I want to open it up to the board for questions, maybe answering these questions and also any kind of questions or comments you might have. So take it away. Michelle, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do have some questions. Thank you, Hillary, for the presentation and the time that you took to consider these alternatives. Um, and also to engage with the climbing community. Um, I'm wondering, and this is maybe a off the wall question, but I know that there's a lot of risk. I'm like Tom Isaacson, I'm a climber, so I take a certain amount of risk. And I know from having seen the crowds, at least climbing on the other side of the canyon, I see all the crowds all the time over there, and they're not the type of people, they're not rock climbers, obviously. There are people visiting from Nebraska and not risk takers as much. But I'm just wondering, like, we have this Colorado recreational use statute that protects landowners so long as that we sign the risks involved. I get that City of Boulder doesn't have that risk tolerance for people getting hurt here, particularly their employees who would need to maintain the trail. But has the department considered disposing of the land and donating it to a land trust? Because this is, especially considering our financial constraints, um, and that this could cost somewhere between 200 to $750,000, whether that's even remotely crossed your minds. A land trust that would have a higher risk tolerance for posting the risks and doing that work and letting people use that land at their own risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody's interested in, I believe that would be the method would be a confidential memo from city attorney's office about what the risk of the site. Like I've met with them and they have signed off on the preferred alternative as them being okay with it, and also met with risk management. But if you want more detail about that specifically, and we did talk about that statute in particular, we'd be happy to coordinate that. In terms of disposal, it's been discussed, but not in a particularly serious way quite yet. I think it would be discussed if we do get to the point where we can't engineer something and we're looking at a permanent closure. I think that would be another really good point to discuss. Would be a good point in the process to start discussing really what all is on the table. But no, we have not seriously discussed that yet.
I would say that over the years, some of these what I would call outlier properties, 4th of July Trail, even west of Netherland, that city owns and manages open space. This one, there's been discussions with other agency entities about, hey, we got something here for you. So far, in any of those discussions, there wasn't any interest. The idea of a land trust, so a non-governmental agency, I don't know, and if Bethany may know if there's been any discussion of that, but I'm not aware of anything outside another jurisdiction, Forest Service, Boulder County, of whether or not we've had discussions about transfer of ownership in that regards. But there has been discussions over the years about some of these outlier properties for us that aren't directly connected to our system, and just haven't been interest from other agencies. So, but it is something we can continue to discuss before we arrive at anything final. I think it actually is a good discussion to rekindle some of those past conversations.
Dan, you used to work for a land trust, right? Before you came to the city.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm just wondering is there any precedent for that? Has the city ever done that? To another land agency, I know, but to a land trust.
I don't think with a land trust. No, I don't think we've had a history of transfer of ownership to a nonprofit organization.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the dollar amounts kind of piling up, and then the timeline, given the city's overall budget constraints, like seems like the very earliest would be 2028. It could be 10 years after that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Point noted.
I just wanted to drop that idea in there. And so you mentioned that in alternative two, that there would be most definitely some climbing access possible. Is that right? And have you determined which approaches those would be? Sorry, I'm
Correct.
dealing
Yeah.
with an echo. That's why I'm talking so weird.
Sam, could you go back? Or oh, is it? It's oh, can I? Oh, I can change it. Never mind. I can drive. Yes, hang on. Yes, so specifically for climbing access, what we are anticipating is you can, I think, barely see this bus stop sign here. So we are anticipating that climbing access would start from behind that. We do own a parcel that kind of juts off and along the road. So you would go up and over. There is a keyhole there, and this is an area where we would, you already mentioned it, the recreation statute of very specific language there where you have to make a decision. And this is part of the difference of like separating visitors who have an intent to take a risky, to then partake in risky activity versus just taking in the view of the falls and visiting with family and being there for 10 to 29 minutes. So there would be a separated use. It would be there on the other side, up behind through the gate, and then you would contour over and actually pick up the old climbing access trail, maybe about a third of the way from the keyhole, and then proceed through the keyhole. So for about a third of it, it would be the same as the old climbing access, and then the rest of it would contour and then come back out through this area. And we're also still fine tuning what that alignment looks like, what the signage looks like, what the infrastructure looks like. How do we communicate that out? Are there other things we need to consider, like a permitting or a waiver system? So there's still some unknowns with this, but right now we're really confident that we can have both of those uses in this alternative.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions I have, Hanan.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. I can't see Sarah, but Sarah, if you have anything that you want to add or questions you want to jump in.
Oh yeah, great. I do have my camera on, and so I assume you can't see me because
No, it's not you.
what's
It's just the way that
showing on the
the way
screen.
the Zoom is working.
We can see her now.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can see
Okay,
you now.
great.
Yeah.
The first thing on my mind is it's not a question. It's really just stating something that I believe is important to all of us. This is a really special area because I think I'm going to call it accessible, not necessarily in the handicapped accessible sense, but in the sense that this is really where people who don't feel comfortable, when I have my relatives come in from the Midwest, we'll use that example. It's a place that I can take them to get close to nature, to experience just the power of these mountains and all of the beauty. And so, I'm a little sad that we aren't going to get up close in the same way with this viewpoint. And I understand the logic and I support it. But whatever we can do to make it, like when I saw how I can see, having been through all these places in Colorado, when we have that grading system and we can look down and get what's happening below, I see value in that. And it's a little bit scary or different for people that are used to just walking on ground. So whatever we can do to maintain the history that we have there of this being a place where people get outside in a new way and experience the power of nature, I think is good without pushing it too far. I kind of want to keep this one pretty accessible, pretty standard as much as possible, and not go too crazy with in whatever ways we can. The second, so that was just my own comment and statement about getting more people out in nature in general and getting people comfortable out there. The other thing is a question. It is a question. Have we done any studies? What will happen with the water? Because I mean, we don't even have any snow up there right now. And I'm just curious, what is the long-term outlook for Boulder Falls? Will it still be Boulder Falls? Do we know? 5, 10 years, 20 years out? I mean, I've lived here for 26 years. In that amount of time, will we still have a Boulder Falls? Do we know?
Yeah, Hillary.
Yes.
Our
No.
trails infrastructure manager.
Yes, I do know a lot about that. That's a fascinating question. Presumably, but I suppose if we have enough droughts, I mean, when I was out there with Channel 8 News, I mean, it's very dry, but there was very much still a waterfall. So here's hoping that for the next, 126 years that there will be people enjoying the view, but who knows, like the whole canyon could come crashing down in that time period too. Like,
Sure, sure.
We'll see.
Floods, drought, fire, wind. Yeah, okay. Okay, great. I was curious if we had any real studies or data that we could lean on for that. But okay, great. Those are my questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah.
So I think I heard, but my concern when thinking about this plan and reading through it was, how are you going to keep me from accidentally going up the climbing trail? I'm someone who has no business, climbing rocks, and I appreciate there's folks like Michelle who can do that and enjoy it, right? But like, are you gonna have signs or a gate, or like, how am I not gonna be like, oh, I saw someone go that way, I'm gonna go that way, and I have no business going that way, right?
yeah, it's a very fair point, and this is where site design and really understanding our visitors is going to be very, very important. So we want to make the viewing platform the most attractive thing for people like yourselves to go to there, so you aren't necessarily drawn to this other thing. And then for the people who are like maybe curious about who's going over there with their packs and their ropes and then going up, one of the things that we've seen be successful in other places on our system is not actually maintaining or doing minimal maintenance on the first bit of a trail to really cut down on people who are just wandering about. So that could be something that we do where it's kind of rough and ready for the first little bit. Maybe there's some signage, maybe there's not. Like, I think we can lean on some of our other learnings, especially as we move through the climbing access project that we're doing now, where we're starting to sign some stuff and see like how does that impact visitation. And so we'll learn from that as this is going along to kind of see what works best for different people. And then definitely very much like the big scary sign. I think Harmon, you were the one talking about with the skull and crossbones last time. Like, to make it in no uncertain terms that there is no maintenance beyond this point, it is very dangerous, and you are taking all your liability on yourself to proceed, and that you should be engaging in rock climbing if you're going to continue through here. And so obviously we don't know that will work 100% of the time. We probably don't even expect it to work 100% of the time, but really understanding those two site design elements and being very thoughtful from the beginning with it, I think will go really far. And then we can always adaptively manage as we need to. Like, maybe that looks like different signage or more signage, or maybe we miss the mark a little bit on one or the other, and then we can adjust from there.
Great. It sounds like y'all put a lot of thought into it. And also I love the drawing. It was great. I think I can visualize it now.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Scott,
Hillary.
I would like to add that my recollection of that area is it's very steep.
It is.
And it's very much like it's loose ground. So like Hillary said, don't do any work there and it won't be inviting. But if you were to look up that, you'd be like, there's no way in heck I'm going up that. Now, if you're a climber, you're like, oh, is that the shortest way to get to where I want to go? Yeah, I'll definitely do that.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that is maybe worth recognizing is in the past, we've managed Boulder Falls a little bit more hands off with climbing access, like a wink and a nod, like, yeah, you can go back there if you know the certain, like, we want to bring it to light to say, yes, if you're engaging in these activities and you're this visitor group, we have this trail over here for you. If you're this other kind of visitor, go here. This is the most like on top of each other that we have these two visitation types and experiences happening in our system. So this will also be great learning as all of our trail work is.
Okay. Well, I think it's great. I was concerned that the platform would sort of be an inviting jump off point for climbers, but it seems like it's going to be pretty high above the ground by the time you get to the end of it and have a railing and stuff. And maybe there's even a place for signage there where it says like climbing access that way. So the climber gets up to the, to the the viewing platform looking for the trail and sees that that's not where the trail starts, goes back around to the actual climbing access. But I think the rendering looks good, and I love the idea of not having to maintain a trail in a really dangerous place. And given how short the trail is, I don't think the view is going to be, of course, there's nothing like being sprayed by the actual spray of the water of the waterfall, but you'll still get a really good view with the preferred alternative. So, I think it seems like a good middle ground and probably the right thing to do. And, all those backcountry gates that we go through when we want to ski out of the resort, skull and crossbones, this is your decision point. You might die, right? It's pretty clear. So if you want to limit your liability, I think that's, it's a great idea. And if if you want to let the climbers know where that little rough and ready scramble is to get up, with a little climbing access arrow, and then once you get to the first flat place, then you put the skull and crossbones swinging gate and say, now that you've made it here, here's your warning. You go even further, you can die, and then you kind of kill both well, we don't want to kill birds here at open space. We don't want to kill climbers either. But yeah, I mean, the notion of like you're limiting the people who go up there to the people who can get up that first scramble. And then you're also informing them once they're up there. So I think sort of a hybrid approach might be good, but it's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, this was challenging to work through a preferred alternative, partially because we have such different risk-taking levels, which we've already talked about with these two different groups. Like, how do we manage that? And, what is the difference between having the 260,000 people just congregating at the base of this really dangerous thing and having somebody pass through who's already planning on engaging in a risky activity? And like, I feel like I know that this is not going to be as beautiful and as powerful of an experience, but I feel like it's the best that we can do right now with this area that we have and the options that we have available. So I'm excited to see what we can get from design and engineering from folks to figure out what this could look like.
Yeah, well, guys, given the history of closures that you illustrated in the staff report, if we can get this thing managed and open by 2028, that would be a really, historically speaking, short closure and a quick solution to a difficult problem. So I wish you the best and hope that we can get into the public engagement process as soon as possible. Any other final thoughts before we move on? Okay, Dan, next item.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Hillary, and thank you out there to all the team that was working on this. And we have our marching orders and we're excited. That's great. We have one more item. We wanted to give you an update on one of our most ambitious projects of 2025 that moved over into 2026 a little bit. But Eileen Flax, landscape architecture, is going to provide us probably with our last update on the Marshall Mesa Trailhead redesign project. So.
Sorry, I didn't get any text.
Eileen, before you get started, are you the one to thank for that rendering of the viewing platform?
No, I am not. That was hilarious. She's
wow.
got it going on.
Oh, wow. So, like Bethany, Hillary can handle it.
Yeah, she's got it. She's got it going on. Thanks, Leah. So we wanted to just give you an update on the Marshall Mesa project. We've been working on this for quite a while now, and here's another touch on it. So next one. As you probably know, the Marshall Mesa Trailhead is located in the south part of the system. It's one of the first connections with the system that many visitors have. It's a really popular trailhead. Both for the human history, the natural history, the rich geology, all of the tremendous wildlife resources that we have there. We have been, there's also a long history of Indigenous occupation that we are looking forward to hearing more about through the upcoming ethnographic report, which should be, it's coming any day now, and really, really excited about it.
Next one, our visitors are, there's a lot of biking at this, coming from this trailhead, but also hiking and walking and dog walking and running. We have equestrians out here and a lot of accessibility, accessible trails or accessible uses. Next one. The Colorado Division of Reclamation, Mining, and Safety did a huge mitigation effort last year. They dug down through about 9 acres, represented by the blue outline in this drawing, down to 30 feet. They mitigated the smoldering coal seam there by just spreading out and cooling out all of that material and then putting it back approximately where it had been before. Next one. And then they went ahead and restored those areas. The seed, this was last summer, seed came in really well. You're looking at a sterile hybrid wheatgrass is the tall stuff, but there are also a lot of natives coming in underneath that, and the restoration they did is quite successful. Next one. We have been able to, while the trailhead has been closed for just about a year now, we have been able to keep open the trails by putting in a new connection to the Marshall Valley Trail, thus allowing for ongoing access to the whole Dirty Bismarck loop and around, having access at the other points and then through there. Next one. So there has been a connector trail coming around, kind of circling around the construction work so that we've been able to maintain that access through the time. We have been coordinating with the Colorado Department of Transportation. We initially provided an interim access from the CDOT lot over to the trailhead. We will be formalizing that with the final trailhead renovation with a connector to the parking lot, from the CDOT lot to the trailhead, and we will be installing our RFBs, rectangular rapid flashing beacons, at that crosswalk so that you push a button and it will flash. And hopefully those signs will stay in place longer than the ones that have been in. They're very popular for stealing. They're missing again now. We've been working with the Mountain View Fire Protection District. They installed a fire protection cistern on our property. The water will be filled from the trailhead above and then accessed for any uses from below. And this is an image of the cistern in place. It is all covered up now, and the final components of the access hydrant are being finalized right now. We've also worked with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, on replacing the vault restroom that was burned in the Marshall fire. That's the new restroom is in place now. And there's a rendering in the upper right of what it's going to look like when everything grows in. We have our existing backstop on the site, and we are still working through if we're going to have some additional shade panels on there. That's to be determined still, but there's a new shade shelter for picnic area on the left that is also in place as now. We've been working hard to provide multimodal access. So the driveway geometry supports shuttle access into the site, and there's a shuttle drop off. You can wait at that picnic shelter that we were just looking at. That also supports equestrian trailer parking. And there's plenty of bike parking in 3 different locations at the trailhead, just to make sure that everyone has a place to pull over and use whatever part of the trailhead works for them. There will be a nature discovery area. This is just the bare bones of it, but there are logs and rocks, many of which were excavated from the mitigation project and came to the surface through that will be available for having a hands-on experience of the site. Accessibility has been an important component. We have ample accessible parking, and then all of the trails around the trailhead are to the outdoor recreation accessibility guideline standard, so will be accessible to all. We have reconfigured the coal seam to connect in a simpler way. Kind of, it makes more logical sense, and this has enabled us to address some of the trail maintenance backlog. There's the connector from the CDOT lot that will be coming in, and then we hope to provide a future interpretive trail that's phase 2 will be coming. Interpretation is on its way from the original backstop designs. We wanted to update that, the interpretation that was there. We went through a process both with our community. There is an eco-healing report that many of the youth in the community contributed to how to interpret and use ecology to help us heal. And those recommendations went into a master plan for interpretation on the site. We're providing phase 1 interpretation, so there'll be 3 different components. One is at the picnic shelter, really focusing on prairie ecology and fire ecology and how those relate to us all. At the backstop, there'll be a welcoming and orientation that focuses on geology and human history on the site, and then just a small component on etiquette on the trail. And so a kind of reminder about slow down and communicate so that everybody can use the trails together. We had a great salvage event before the mitigation work started where folks were invited to come take plants before the mitigation happened. And then we are hoping to have the junior rangers be an integral part of the planting that will happen this spring. So trailhead construction is underway, and we are hoping to open in the next month or so. Here's a schedule, shows our work from starting in 2023. The stars are the times we've touched base with OSBT. Here we are towards that last bottom green in January. We hope to open the trailhead in the next month or so, and then install interpretation and plantings this spring, and then have a grand opening event towards the end of May. Thanks for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
All right. Entertain questions from the board. Michelle?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it looks beautiful. I'm so excited for this. I've been waiting for it for the last year. And you've done a really good job in programming the what was it, the Touch the Trucks events, and other ways to get the community involved. I have a question regarding whether you mentioned that you realigned the coal seam trail and were able to deal with some deferred maintenance of the trails. Were you able to salvage the slick rock? I know that both Harm and I were interested in keeping that.
There will be a spur coming off. So the main trail does not go along the slick rock at all, but there's going to be just a loop that you can do to kind of get to the main trail off a side loop. So yes, it has been preserved as an access route.
Hey, it's going to be fun. Thank you for doing that.
Sure.
And then with opening in February and then a ribbon cutting in May, I'm just wondering whether we can have something special for the folks who built that temporary trail that allowed that access while it was closed. And I believe that was a combination of the Fairview High School mountain biking team. Those teenagers were out there digging those trails. And I think they did it over a long weekend, and BMA, and just having something special for them.
I think that's a great call. They'll certainly be included in the invitation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
How about John? Do you have anything?
It's really exciting to see this come to a close, and I was going to suggest the same thing Michelle did um, with regard to recognizing the folks who helped build that trail. I also wanted to, recognize staff. That was one where I think the board came to you and the community came to you, with that ask to build that trail, and staff was really responsive and helped make that happen. So it was really great to see that as part of this project.
Okay. Hey, Sarah, got anything?
I would just echo, it's really wonderful that this has come together. It looks fabulous, and I can't wait to go and see it in person and to take my son there. And thank you for all your work.
Awesome. I have a question about the Marshall Fire. Is there anything in the interpretation that commemorates that?
So the picnic area focus, we have a stone dedicated to somebody who lost their life in the fire. So that kind of is a grounding influence that connects us to the fire.
Mm-hmm.
And then the interpretation really focuses on fire. It asks questions. It speaks to the resilience of our community. And we want to really balance and not get too into the weeds about what happened at Marshall, but give an opportunity for that eco healing to reflect on what the fire meant to us and how our community reflects resilience. Our consultant did a really beautiful job with getting the language together. It gets me teary when
Wow.
nice
Yeah.
to,
Thank you. I look forward to seeing it. And when we were at Sawhill Ponds, we saw the new style of hybrid surfacing for parking lots at trailheads. Um, are we going to use that? Is that being employed on the sharp curves and kind of creating reference points and data for grading in the future here too?
It is. So the main parking area has concrete curb and gutter and then concrete surfacing on the turns. The shuttle drop off and equestrian parking is also concrete curb and gutter and aggregate parking. And then the whole main driveway is concrete.
Mm-hmm. And the handicap spaces?
And the ADA spaces are also concrete.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I guess finally, I'd just like to say this has been a really neat collaboration in so many different angles and areas. I think it's been a great collaboration between the board and staff, and between staff and the community. You guys have just done such a wonderful job being responsive and creative, and it just looks great. A couple of areas that are really near and dear to my heart are, I love that that exposed bedrock that you called the slick rock is still going to be, a play place for people on mountain bikes, and that it's part of the system just like it used to be. Um, and if you know about it, you can go there. That's very cool, and we asked for that, and you guys it sounds like you just delivered perfectly. So thank you with that. And then even going back to the first time we had a touch on this, and we looked at preliminary designs. I remember there were extra, in my mind, extra drive aisles in the parking area that I think I commented that they were both taking away parking spots and creating more opportunities for vehicular pedestrian conflict. And why don't we get more parking spaces and lose pedestrian vehicular conflict at the same time? It seems like a win-win, and looks like you've totally maximized the utility of the parking area, and it's just attractive and effective, and hopefully a lot safer. And just can't wait to see this thing, and congratulations. It looks awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wonderful design. Anything else before we? Okay. Did you get the answers to the questions that you had posed at all, or you good? You don't need any more feedback. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah.
All
Thanks,
right, we'll turn
Eileen.
it back to Dan. I guess we're at director's reports and
Yeah, and
almost
my
adjournment.
report was on the wind event, which we took care of through matters from the board. So yeah, I think I'm done as well. I'll just make note, and we'll come back to you this spring on an update on it. But City Council met. Their annual retreat was Monday and Tuesday, and directors all attended, and including me. And it was a really robust. It was a really well run. It was a great 2 days from a citywide perspective and interacting with council. but part of their duty was to select their top priorities for 2026. They realized that they only had 9 months for these priorities. They also realized they had 2 priorities that were continuing into this year, the BVCP development and the long-term financial strategy, Fund Our Future project. So with 2 robust ones already on, they decided to limit to 6. And I just want to say that 2 of the 2 wildfire projects were selected. So wildfire resilience was well represented in this year's council priorities. And that, of course, means some work for us, which is great because what they selected were actually sort of an acceleration of what the city is already doing. From one was centered around better communications out to the community, and the other one was doing an assessment analysis of all of the projects that are underway and to get a better sense of where our priorities are, where our biggest bang for our buck should be. And so further digging into the portfolio of projects. So we welcome both those selections, and OSMP will have a big part to play on at least that second one. And so looking forward to it. And I believe that our first touch on wildfire with you all is in April, and we may know more about what those council priorities will look like and maybe what that lift for OSMP specifically may look like. So we'll come back early spring and update you on that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to call the meeting adjourned.